Welcome back, everybody, to Inside Academia, the weekly program where we take a look behind the ivory curtain, seeking a frank discussion of American higher education. I'm your host, Andy Nash, and our guest today is Greg Lukianoff. He is a First Amendment attorney and also the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education seeks essentially to defend and sustain individual rights in America's colleges and universities. These rights include freedom of speech, legal equality, due process, religious liberty, and sanctity of conscience, the essential qualities of individual liberty and dignity. This organization was founded in 1999 and has tackled many cases with respect to free speech on college campuses. Greg, it's great to have you today on Inside Academia. What was the genesis of an organization like this?
Well, the story of the founding of FLIer goes back long before it was actually founded to Alan Charles Kors at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a professor of the Enlightenment. He was very concerned about the growing restrictions on freedom of speech happening thanks to speech codes and an anti-free speech movement that came out of the 1980s. And there was a case back in 1993 where a student was nearly kicked out of Penn for shouting "Go home, you water buffaloes" out of his window. Now, nobody could quite figure out how water buffaloes was a slur, but nonetheless, he was brought up on charges of harassment. Alan was the primary person who defended the student in that case. After taking that case national, though, Alan and Harvey Silverglate, who's a civil liberties attorney from Boston, that started receiving complaints from all over the country. So then they wrote a book called The Shadow University that was talking about all of these cases from all over the country. And after writing that, they got even more requests for help from students across the country. And I have to say, I went to law school. I specialized in First Amendment law. I took every class that my school offered. I did a 6-credit independent study on First Amendment law. I came in thinking that I'd be a difficult person to shock when it came to restrictions on freedom of speech, but I'm shocked almost on a daily basis when it comes to actually what's going on campuses.
Give us some examples. What are some of the things over the course of the last decade that the FLIer has uncovered or that has worked on or tackled?
Well, I'm actually working on as I talk to you, I have another screen open where I'm actually working on a book called Unlearning Liberty, that's about the cost societally of these violations of freedom of speech that happen on campus. And the problem that I'm running into is that after 10 years of working at FLIer, we have way too many examples. There was a case at University of New Hampshire where a student posted a sign. He was angry that students were taking the elevator not just up one floor but also down one floor. Mm-hmm. So he made a joking sign saying something like 9 out of 10 freshman girls gain 10 pounds in their first year, but there's something you can do about that. Take the stairs if you live below the 7th floor. Now, this was his joking way of basically saying, for goodness sakes, we're 18 years old. Right. You don't need to take the elevator up and down one floor. Right. He got caught for this. Now, it's amazing that the idea you get caught for this at all. This is a public college. He's protected by the First Amendment. This isn't even a close call. I mean, if this was a close call, you could shut down The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, practically everything on Comedy Central immediately. And so he then proceeded to apologize. He gave this incredibly contrite apology. It was way out of proportion to what he'd actually done. Right. Nonetheless, he was found guilty of, what was it? Harassment, violating the affirmative action policy, and disorderly conduct. He was kicked out of the dormitories, had to live out of his car while FLIer was fighting this case. He was sentenced to mandatory psychological counseling, 2 years probation, a 3,000-word essay. It's just completely insane. And the idea that the mandatory psychological counseling is one of the things that I find the most egregious of all. And 2 years probation, and kicked out of the dorms. And one of the reasons why I'm thinking about this case right now is because I'm writing a section of the book talking about how students' rights get violated all the time, and they don't even seem to notice. And if they do notice, they don't care. And worst of all, in some cases, it's actually the students going, yeah, punish that person for making that joke.
So you said mandatory psychological counseling. It sounds like something out of the Brezhnev era. So the groups like FLIer have been founded to uncover all these sort of cases and legally challenge them, right?
Well, we're actually not a litigation organization. I'm a constitutional lawyer, and the attorneys who work for FIRE, who particularly the ones who evaluate our speech codes, we're all trained attorneys. But we don't actually litigate cases. What we do is we try to actually fight cases out in the court of public opinion, because in a lot of cases, for one thing, it's quicker. Yeah. And one of the things that FIRE was founded on, which we took from Allen, is that universities cannot defend in public what they do in private.
Right.
And fighting these things out in public is much more faster and oftentimes much more effective than taking them to court. The section that I'm working on in the book right now is talking about how from K through 12, you're not learning about the Bill of Rights. You're not learning about your rights. And you're getting constantly bad examples from administrators. I mean, high school administrators aren't exactly friends of free speech these days. Mm-hmm. So by the time students get to college, I feel like colleges actually take advantage of the fact that students don't know that much about free speech. They certainly don't know that they have wildly increased rights as soon as they actually enter college. Mm-hmm. And that's how they're able to pass speech codes. I mean, we just came out with a report, our 2011 report on the state of speech codes on campus. Now this is by far the biggest study that's ever been conducted. I think we evaluate 390 schools. We have someone who's a dedicated attorney, and she spends basically all her time going through the policies of universities. Originally started to get rid of this myth that speech codes, went the way of the dodo back in the 90s. A lot of people believe this, but from our research of 390 top schools, 69% of colleges maintain codes that are laughably unconstitutional or would be unconstitutional to public college. Right. Now, and believe it or not, that's an improvement. Actually, no, I think it's 67. That's actually an improvement because over just a couple of years ago, it was 79% of colleges maintain codes that were laughably unconstitutional. And we think that because there's been increased litigation, mm-hmm. and because there's been a couple findings with cases that FIRE has been involved in, where administrators have been held personally liable for violating the free speech rights of students, that I think that there is starting to be some movement. Yeah. Decrease in speech codes, but still 67% is a ridiculous number. And of course, this can be undone at any time. Like right now, one of the big things is bullying, and people are trying to actually take bullying logics that do make sense for K through 8. Mm-hmm. and applying them and asking for them to actually be applied to colleges now, where they don't fit at all.
Last fall, university freshman at Rutgers, Tyler Clementi, tragically took his life after discovering that 2 other students had spied on him. And so in response, Senator Frank Lautenberg and Representative Rush Holt have authored a bill dubbed the Tyler Clementi Higher Education Anti-Harassment Act, aiming to prevent future incidents of college bullying by dramatically expanding the scope of existing anti-harassment regulations. In a nutshell, Greg, what exactly are they proposing with this bill?
What Lautenberg is actually proposing is something that's even broader, and actually it gets rid of the reasonable person standard, which is pretty crazy. It makes universities responsible for students' actions pretty much wherever they are on the planet. Right. The implications of the bill are, for anybody who works in civil liberties for higher education, terrifying. Meanwhile, there's so many things that are tragic about this. Not the least of which is the fact that what happened to Tyler Clementi, everyone knows was wrong, and everybody also knows was already illegal.
There's a distinction legally between public universities and private universities as far as to the extent to which the laws apply one way or another.
Absolutely. The First Amendment applies to public universities. It applies through the 14th Amendment, but generally, First Amendment protections only apply on public campuses. Mm-hmm. FIRE's position is that if you follow the logic of freedom of association, you both have the right to form and the right to join more restrictive schools if you want to. Ones that don't promise freedom of speech, ones that actually place other values above freedom of speech. You do not, however, have the right to lie about what you are. Okay. So, there are a handful of schools that we don't actually rate. There's only about 7 of them, and they include some military institutions. They include yeshiva. That includes Brigham Young. It also includes a couple technical universities where they make it very clear that they place certain values above freedom of speech. That yeshiva, obviously religious identity, and some of the other ones, they just don't make promises of freedom of speech if you're going to attend that college. Since most schools promise, like Yale, as promises of freedom of speech are incredibly strong. They talk about mentioning the unmentionable and thinking thinking the unthinkable. It's this very impassioned defense of freedom of speech. But just last year, we had a case there where students were prevented from having an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote on a T-shirt making fun of Harvard because it used the word sissies on it.
So let me just because we only have a few minutes. Do most of these cases and most of these policies, for that matter, that you're addressing, that these universities come up with, are they primarily along the lines of who's offended, who feigns offense in some cases?
Right.
Is it along the lines of just harassment and I'm offended and it's a politically correct type thing, or is it along all sorts of different lines?
It's an interesting mixed bag, and I make no bones about it. You're definitely more likely to get in trouble for expressing a socially conservative point of view. No two ways about that. But at the same time, a lot of times it's just an administrator doesn't like being criticized. It's just an administrator doesn't like. But the funny thing is, and it's a sick thing that college students fall for this stuff, is that sometimes the college it will be nothing more than the administration doesn't like being insulted or made fun of. Right. But then the university will wrap itself in the cloak of like tolerance and diversity, basically saying kind of like you shouldn't be making fun of. Well,
Penn State University, until they changed it, actually, in one of their policies, the line actually said, intolerance shall not be tolerated. So they finally changed that. To universities, this seems like an external special interest group coming in with their agenda. That's what they would argue. So my question to you is, how do you respond to that? And has all this worked? Even if you win a case in court where you challenge a university's speech code, perhaps they change it. Many times they go on, as you know, business as usual, and they continue to violate the next student's rights. And what do you do despite the ruling? So has it worked? Where is this all going?
It's a hard fight, and Fire's had tremendous successes over the years. I mean, I think we're pushing nearly 200 victories over the years, and the total effect of policies that we've had changed directly due to our action now reaches something like 2 million students across the country. But it's a bit of an uphill battle because one of the main reasons why it's gotten so bad on college campuses is because there's been this massive expansion of the bureaucracies at campuses, and that's just continued like rocketing upwards for all of the last 10 years. Now, I'm a little bit optimistic, in part because of this massive economic downturn is making people and people realizing that there might even be a higher education bubble. It's causing people across the political spectrum to reevaluate colleges and universities and ask themselves, wait a second. Now, first of all, $60,000 a year, does that even make sense when the average American makes $43,000 a year? And for goodness sakes, if you're going to charge $60,000 a year, at least you should get due process and freedom of speech. Right. So I think right now there is an opportunity because I think there's a lot of people who are dissatisfied and frustrated with higher education that they're willing to actually look at it critically. And I think this is coming from people on surprising points of the political spectrum. So I'm hopeful. That's one of the reasons why I'm writing a book right now, is because I want to have something that I can show and so we can actually talk about reforms that need to be made and make the case more or less that people are so, and this is happening particularly this week. People are so fixated on the idea that of hurtful and passionate speech, not understanding that one of the goals of higher education should be to allow people to figure out how to have uncomfortable arguments, how to have difficult discussions, and how to live with actually having their opinions challenged. And they're utterly falling down on the job, and they can't succeed in that until speech codes are gone, and until you actually replace the sort of like ethos of nobody hurt anybody's feelings with an ethos of let's dive in, let's have meaty discussions.
Well, Craig, it seems like the lines have been blurred about what's a real case of harassment and versus what is just something that's frivolous. And we seem to be trying to find that line every day. But that's all the time we have for now. Greg, I want to thank you again. Thefire.org is the website for your organization. People can read about that online. Good luck to you and everything you're working on, Greg. I want to thank you again for joining us today. Greg Lukianoff, again, the First Amendment attorney and president currently of the FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. This has been Inside Academia with Andy Nash. Check us out again on our website, insideacademia.tv, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Join us again next week and every week as we take you behind the ivory curtain.